The draxl invasion had begun. Earth's defense systems were overwhelmed within hours of the first assault. The alien fleet, massive and ominous, hovered over major cities like dark moons blocking out the sun. Their weapons, an unsettling mix of plasma cannons and energy disruptors, cut through Earth's meager defenses as if they were nothing more than paper. Every city that tried to resist was obliterated with brutal efficiency. The people had no chance, and humanity's last hopes were dwindling. In the midst of this chaos, one location held out, an isolated military outpost on the outskirts of Nevada. It wasn't much, a relic from a time before the world had fallen into disarray. The building was a mix of old technology and salvaged equipment. But within its walls, a handful of soldiers remained, including one individual, Staff Sergeant Lucas Steele Mitchell. Mitchell had seen the worst of humanity's wars, but this was something different. The draxl were no ordinary invaders. They were a collective of several different species, each of them technologically advanced, each of them deadly in ways humanity couldn't comprehend. The draxl viewed themselves as the dominant species of the galaxy. They had wiped out civilizations that had existed for millennia without even breaking a sweat. The idea that they might be stopped by something as primitive as a human was laughable to them. Despite the overwhelming odds, the humans had been given a simple mission: hold the line. The draxl were coming, and they were coming fast. The few hundred soldiers at the Nevada outpost weren't enough to stop the enemy, but their purpose was clear: buy time. The military command had hopes for reinforcements, though those hopes had been slowly fading. It was the end of the world, and the best they could hope for was to delay the inevitable. The alien forces had arrived in full force, descending like vultures onto the shattered remains of Earth's cities. The draxl warships orbited the globe, blocking all communications and scanning the planet's surface for any signs of resistance. With an eerie quiet, their generals, creatures with a combination of cybernetic enhancements, brutish strength, and alien intelligence, had begun their descent. They were the ones who had led countless conquests, each more brutal than the last. They were accustomed to planets that surrendered without firing a shot. They were accustomed to victory, and their arrogance reflected it. At the command center of the Nevada outpost, General Korvac, the lead draxl general, stood with his entourage of elite soldiers. He sneered at the images on his holographic display of the outpost's weak defenses. The outpost was, in his mind, nothing more than a brief inconvenience. One blast from his ship's plasma cannon would be enough to obliterate the entire complex. Korvac's voice boomed through the air, rich with contempt. These humans, they think they can resist? We have crushed entire worlds in less time than it takes to brew a cup of our coffee. His second in command, a towering alien with armored exoskeleton plating and a deformed, insect-like face, chuckled at the thought of a human resistance. They are ants, he said with a sneer. We will crush them with ease. I am almost disappointed they are wasting our time. Their weapons are nothing compared to ours. Korvac leaned in closer to the holodisplay, his face a mixture of distaste and amusement. Yes, their primitive guns. How quaint. I expect they will break before they even see us. I almost feel sorry for them. As the generals discussed their victory, their ships began descending into Earth's atmosphere, opening fire on any human settlements they could locate. Within hours, cities like New York, London, and Tokyo had been reduced to ash. The alien forces showed no mercy. Human lives were irrelevant. Only the conquest mattered. But while the world crumbled around them, Sergeant Mitchell wasn't thinking about global defeat. He wasn't thinking about Earth's inevitable fall. What he focused on, in his training and in his gut, was the one thing that had kept humanity alive all this time: survival. It was his job to hold the line, and he was damn good at it. The outpost's ragtag defenses, composed of outdated firearms and barely functioning equipment, could never stand against the might of the draxl. But Mitchell knew something the draxl didn't: the human spirit, the ingenuity of a single individual who could outthink and outlast an overwhelming force. The first wave of alien soldiers hit the perimeter of the outpost with terrifying speed. Their shock troops were a mix of monstrous biosoldiers and mechanical drones, each one capable of leveling entire buildings with a single swipe of their weaponry. The humans had only basic firearms left: old rifles, handguns, and the occasional rocket launcher. It wasn't much, but it was all they had. Mitchell, however, wasn't concerned with their lack of firepower. He was concerned with how he could make them pay for every inch they gained. He stood alone at the top of a ridge, rifle in hand, watching the draxl forces assemble in the valley below. His sniper rifle was an old model, a relic of wars past. The draxl had advanced beyond any weapon humanity could muster. They had energy weapons, shields, and armor that were nearly impervious to conventional bullets. But Mitchell had something they didn't: patience. He exhaled, steadying his breath. His eyes narrowed as he lined up the scope, adjusting for wind and distance. The first shot rang out, a single, crisp crack breaking the silence. One of the draxl soldiers dropped to the ground, the first of many. It was a long shot, far longer than most snipers would even attempt, but Mitchell knew exactly what he was doing. His weapon wasn't the most advanced, but it was deadly in the right hands. He was used to fighting battles that weren't fair, and that's exactly how he liked it. One by one, he took them down. Every shot was calculated, every target chosen with deliberate precision. The draxl generals, still on their ship, were unaware of the lethal presence hiding on the ridge. They assumed their forces were invincible, that the humans were already defeated. But Mitchell's shots kept cutting through their ranks, one after another, sending the draxl soldiers scrambling for cover, confused and panicked. At that moment, General Korvac's arrogance began to crack. His forces, which had been steadily advancing, were suddenly faltering. Their command center, perched atop a massive warship, received reports of casualties among their ranks. Korvac, furious, demanded answers. "What's happening? Why are we losing soldiers?" he shouted. One of his subordinates, a high-ranking draxl officer, analyzed the reports, his digital eye flickering as he zoomed in on the battlefield below. "It's a sniper. The humans have a sniper, sir. One individual is taking out our soldiers from a distance. We can't see him." Korvac's face twisted in disbelief. "One human? A single human with a primitive weapon?" His subordinates tried to calm him down, but the realization was sinking in. Despite their overwhelming technological advantage, the humans were fighting back. And not just any humans. One human, armed with a sniper rifle, was inflicting real damage. The draxl generals had underestimated humanity. "Send in the hunters," Korvac growled. "We will find him. We will crush this Marine." But deep down, Korvac knew something was different this time. This human wasn't just another soldier. This one was special. He hadn't just survived the chaos, he had made the invincible draxl bleed. And that fact gnawed at him, the realization that for the first time, the draxl might have met their match in this simple, ancient weapon. The invasion was far from over. But for the first time, Korvac felt uncertainty. He was no longer sure of his victory. The draxl had no regard for human technology. Their generals scoffed at the idea of primitive Earth weaponry. They saw the humans' guns, missiles, and outdated war machines as laughable, nothing more than relics from an inferior species. When the alien forces first arrived on Earth, they expected a brief, one-sided battle. Their soldiers were cybernetically enhanced, their ships armed with hyper-advanced weaponry, and their commanders were tacticians who had crushed civilizations for centuries. To them, humans were nothing but an inconvenience, an annoyance to be eradicated before moving on to the next conquest. The generals, in their arrogance, had been quick to dismiss human capabilities. They mocked the remnants of Earth's military, calling them barbaric for still using firearms. The idea that a human could pose a threat to them with nothing more than a projectile weapon seemed absurd. The draxl generals had laughed at Earth's defense strategies, knowing they were far outmatched. No soldier on Earth, they believed, could ever hope to match the might of the draxl war machine. But the aliens' underestimation of humanity was a fatal mistake. The first major skirmishes were over in seconds. The human soldiers, equipped with old rifles, were no match for the energy beams that evaporated everything in their path. Earth's military, weakened by years of underfunding and internal conflict, barely put up a fight before their lines crumbled. The draxl generals, observing from above, believed they had secured an easy victory. They relished in the idea that they would soon control yet another planet, adding to their long list of conquests. The concept of human resistance had been rendered obsolete in their minds. However, one place still resisted, one outpost where the fighting was not just about survival, but about proving a point. That point was quickly becoming clear to the draxl. They had underestimated the humans. The draxl generals continued to mock the human forces, believing their victory was inevitable. They made a calculated decision to land near the last remaining holdout, an insignificant military base tucked away in a dry desert valley, hoping to crush it once and for all. The soldiers in the outpost would never even see their end coming. Among the soldiers stationed at the outpost, there was one man whose reputation had begun to precede him. Staff Sergeant Lucas Mitchell, or Steele, as he was called, had earned the respect of his fellow soldiers, though he remained a quiet figure. He was a man of few words, a seasoned veteran who had witnessed the failures of humanity's larger military forces. Mitchell had seen firsthand how wars were lost due to overconfidence, how leaders underestimated their enemies, and how easily a battle could be decided by one well-placed shot. To the draxl, Mitchell was just another grunt, just another man with an old rifle. They thought nothing of him, nothing of the sheer skill and patience he had honed over years of training. The generals focused on the obvious targets, the high-ranking officers, the Air Force, and the missile defense systems. They didn't even consider that one man could possibly stand in their way. But they didn't know what made the Marine different. They didn't know how a single soldier, with nothing more than a sniper rifle, could challenge the very arrogance that blinded them. As the draxl forces approached the base, the generals issued their orders, confident in their overwhelming firepower. They activated their energy shields and prepared to annihilate everything in their path. But they didn't anticipate what would happen next. They didn't anticipate how one Marine, standing alone in the vast desert, would start to turn the tide. While the draxl forces looked down on humanity, dismissing them as nothing more than pests, Staff Sergeant Mitchell prepared in silence. He had been trained to recognize that the draxl generals' overconfidence would be their downfall. They had underestimated human resolve, and they had underestimated the power of precision. He was going to show them that a single shot could change everything. The generals continued to dismiss the human forces. They were about to learn, the hard way, that no matter how advanced their technology was, they would never truly understand the strength of a human who had nothing to lose. And at that moment, with the first wave of their assault just hours away, the Marines and Mitchell were about to make their move. The battle was just beginning, and they were going to make the draxl generals regret every laugh they had shared at humanity's expense. They hadn't taken humanity seriously. But that was about to change. Staff Sergeant Lucas Mitchell stood alone in the crumbling outpost, the hum of emergency generators and the distant sound of explosions vibrating through the walls. The draxl were relentless in their assault, and his team had been pushed back. Most of the outpost's defenses had been destroyed in the first wave of the attack. The remaining soldiers were holed up, fighting to buy humanity a few extra hours, but they were outmatched, outgunned, and outnumbered. Yet, despite the overwhelming odds, Mitchell wasn't concerned. He had seen this before. 1,000 times in his career. An enemy who underestimated him. An adversary who made the fatal mistake of assuming they were untouchable. And in that moment, Lucas Mitchell, a Marine sniper, knew he could make them pay. He didn't have the firepower of the rest of the military, no massive artillery, no laser-guided missiles. What he did have was patience, precision, and an old sniper rifle passed down through generations. It was a weapon far older than the draxl's high-tech arsenal, but its power lay in its simplicity. There were no fancy gadgets, no complicated systems, just a rifle and a man with the skill to use it. Mitchell had always been a marksman, a sniper who understood that the battlefield wasn't just about the weapons you had, it was about how you used them. The draxl generals believed themselves to be invincible, But Mitchell knew they lacked the one thing that mattered most: experience. Their arrogance would be their undoing. He waited, watching through the scope as draxl forces moved through the wreckage of the nearby city. Their leaders, towering and intimidating in their cybernetic suits, stood just outside the field of view. It was a game of patience. The draxl believed themselves to be omnipotent, but Mitchell knew that every moment they spent in his sight would bring them closer to a bitter lesson. The key was to stay still, to remain unseen, and to wait for the right opportunity. Mitchell's fingers tightened around the trigger. The first shot rang out, quiet but precise. It struck the nearest general directly in the head. He collapsed in an instant, his enhanced body unable to compensate for the sheer force of the bullet. The alien soldiers around him froze for a moment, stunned by the sudden and unexplained death of their leader. But it wasn't enough. Mitchell didn't just want to kill the generals, he wanted to send a message. One by one, he took out the others. The second shot, another general, another clean kill. The third, a commander who had been standing arrogantly, unaware of the danger, until his body crumpled to the ground. Each kill was a reminder: no amount of cybernetic enhancements could shield them from the inevitability of a well-placed bullet. The draxl were powerful, yes, but they were also predictable. They had no understanding of the silent power of human strategy. They thought in terms of firepower, of overwhelming force, not patience, not precision. As the body count rose, the draxl forces began to falter. At first, they didn't know what was happening. Then, confusion spread. The commanders turned on each other, trying to identify the source of the attacks, but Mitchell was always one step ahead. He used the terrain, the shadows, the elements, everything at his disposal to remain undetected. Each shot was a reminder of the fragility of their confidence. The draxl had believed they were gods among insects, but now they were just insects under the eyes of a predator. The generals who had once laughed at human weaponry now understood the cost of their arrogance. They could feel their grip on the battlefield slipping, and panic began to set in. The Marines may not have had the advanced technology of the draxl, but they had something more powerful: the ability to adapt, to survive, and to fight when all hope seemed lost. Mitchell wasn't just a sniper, he was a symbol of human resilience. While the rest of humanity had been caught off guard by the alien invasion, he had kept his focus, his resolve. He had no time for doubt. There was no time for second-guessing. This was his fight, and he would make it his victory. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the wasteland, Mitchell took a moment to breathe. The draxl generals, once so sure of their victory, had been reduced to panic. Their ranks were thinning, their morale shattered. Mitchell's rifle had done more than kill, it had shaken them to their core. The tide of battle had begun to shift, and it was no longer the draxl who were in control. The humans had found their edge, and it was sharper than any plasma weapon. With one final breath, Mitchell prepared for the next wave. He knew this wasn't over, not yet. But for the first time since the invasion began, he felt a surge of hope. The aliens had underestimated the humans. They had scoffed at the old ways of war. And now, they would learn the hard way: underestimating a Marine with a sniper rifle was the last mistake they would ever make. The draxl generals were confident. Their forces had breached the outpost's outer defenses, and the remaining human resistance seemed like little more than a nuisance. They continued to watch from their command center, certain that the inevitable collapse of Earth's last holdouts was near. They had no idea what was about to happen. Staff Sergeant Mitchell had already taken out 3 of the alien scouts by the time their forces made it to the perimeter of the outpost. His sniper rifle was the only thing that could reach the enemies from this distance, and each shot he took was calculated, deliberate, and deadly. The draxl generals dismissed his actions as insignificant at first, chalking them up to lucky shots or faulty targeting systems. But as the kills mounted, the tone of their assessments began to change. Mitchell's rifle was an old, human-made bolt-action weapon, barely advanced by their standards. The draxl were accustomed to plasma rifles, pulse cannons, and energy disruptors that could obliterate entire buildings with a single shot. To them, The idea that a single human could effectively use such a primitive weapon was absurd. But with each alien scout he dropped from afar, the generals began to realize their mistake. Mitchell wasn't just picking them off by chance, he was hunting them, methodically, with precision they hadn't expected. The longer Mitchell held out, the more dangerous he became. Every draxl officer, every commander, and every elite soldier on the ground became a potential target. Mitchell didn't have the technology to match them, but he had something they didn't: the human instinct for survival, honed by generations of struggle and war. While the draxl were advanced in many ways, they had grown complacent, arrogant. They believed that victory was a foregone conclusion. They believed their technology was invincible. But Mitchell didn't rely on technology alone. His focus was laser-sharp, and his experience in combat was unmatched. He understood the terrain, the patterns of movement, and the rhythm of battle. Every time the draxl tried to push forward, he was there, hidden in the shadows, his sniper rifle singing death from 1,000 yards away. With each successive kill, the draxl generals grew increasingly unnerved. Their tactical superiority was being called into question. Reports from the battlefield showed that Mitchell's shots were having a devastating impact on their command structure. He wasn't just killing soldiers, he was picking off the commanders, the ones who made the decisions, the ones who held the ranks together. His precision and timing were disrupting their entire strategy. As the day wore on, the generals sent in more elite soldiers to take him down, deploying their best-trained units with the latest in cloaking technology and advanced combat suits. But Mitchell, a Marine who had trained in every environment imaginable, was ready. His sniper rifle was old, but it was still one of the deadliest weapons in existence, and he knew exactly how to use it. He could hear their footsteps long before they reached him, and when they made their move, they found themselves either dead or retreating in fear. The tide was shifting. The draxl may have had superior numbers, but Mitchell had something they didn't: the will to fight. His shots were not just tactical, they were personal. With each alien he killed, he reminded them that humanity, though outmatched and outgunned, was not to be underestimated. The Marines were trained for this moment. They were trained to fight, to adapt, to survive, even against impossible odds. The generals, their arrogance slowly turning into frustration, were finally starting to realize the depth of their mistake. They had underestimated humanity not just as a species, but as individuals. And now, Mitchell was proving that Earth was not ready to fall without a fight. He was showing them, one shot at a time, that human resilience and ingenuity were things that even their advanced technology couldn't predict or overcome. The draxl had made a fatal error, and it was costing them dearly.